Alrighty, well, thanks everyone for joining us today. We have a great webinar guest to bring to you today. We're really excited about. And the topic of today's presentation is what questions should an MSP owner consider before selling their business? And before we get into the introduction here with our special guest, I just want to tell you a little bit about the host broker and eBridge Marketing Solutions who are bringing you this webinar today. So on the webinar, we also have Hartland Ross, who's the founder of the host broker. And you're probably familiar with Hartland, but if you're not, he runs the host broker, and the host broker is a brokerage and M&A advisory firm for MSPs, web hosts, data centers, IT service firms, and we also sell IP address blocks. We were founded out of client demand. The eBridge Marketing Solutions actually predates the host broker, and the host broker came about because clients were looking for growth opportunities in the M&A sector as well. If you are interested in more information on the host broker, I would encourage you to check out thehostbroker.com, and we have a free evaluation available that you can sign up for on that URL. And that is me. I'm Devin Rose from eBridge Marketing Solutions, the other side of our business. We're a boutique marketing agency focusing in on the same sort of companies as the host broker, so MSPs, vendors, and IT service firms. We're located in Vancouver, Canada, established in 2001. We do offer a full range of marketing services for our clients, and you can find more information on ebridgemarketingsolutions.com. And our special guest today is Josh Peterson from Barry McKinley, the CEO of Barry McKinley. And Josh, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and about Barry McKinley?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much, Devin and Harlan, for having us on with you. Yeah, Barry McKinley is a management consulting firm. We primarily just work with MSPs. That's all we've been doing for the last 18 years. Everything from the people, process, performance side of the business with how do we sell our services? How do we deliver our services profitably? How do we measure our results? That's a big part of it. The other part of Barry McKinley is our tools consulting, where since fall of 2006, we've been a partner of ConnectWise's, managing, implementing, remodeling the ConnectWise stack for thousands of MSPs over those years. We do have a second business that's very closely aligned to Barry McKinley called BMK Community. And BMK Community is where we run our peer teams, our peer groups, as they're sometimes known as. And we're very excited to be here. This is a very, very exciting topic for us, and really looking forward to it.
Great, Josh. Thanks for that. Appreciate the background there. And the URL for Barry McKinley is on the screen there. If you are interested in more information or if you want to reach out, I would encourage you to check out that website as well. So without further ado, let's jump right into the presentation. So the first question that sellers of MSPs should consider before selling their business that we're going to discuss today is what valuation does the owner need to achieve their goals? And the goals in this sort of a context would be the goals for their next step, whether it's the next step in their retirement, their next business, or whatever they're moving on to after the MSP. After the MSP business. So Josh and Hartland, what are your thoughts on this? If you're an MSP considering what sort of valuation and what they need, the MSP needs to exit, how would you go about thinking about this question?
Sure. Yeah, so that's question that's on slide 5 there. What valuation does the owner need to achieve their goals? That's a question that I hope that everyone listening to this broadcast, this webinar, has already started considering. If we start thinking about it, when we get that offer or when we're ready to list the business for sale, we're already pretty far behind the curve. We really, it's such a personal question to everyone, but if we're thinking about what do I want to net from this deal? It's kind of like selling or buying a house. There's a lot of fees and taxes that come involved where we think, boy, we sold the business for $1 million, but only, 450 landed in my bank account. That's not a very good feeling to realize halfway through the deal. So getting that life goal, that idea of what's going to be fair, what's going to be meaningful to my family or my household. I mean, that's what really drives that decision. Harlan, would you agree with that, or could you layer onto that?
Yeah, I think there's a number of angles to this question. First of all, what valuation does an owner need to achieve their goals? So first of all, where are they at in their life? Is it a retirement play here where they're looking to, this is their sort of their last shot, and they need to set themselves up for retirement because there's going to be no more income, and what does that look like? If not, then it's a bit of a different story. Unfortunately, sometimes the expectations for the value of the business are driven based on someone's personal objectives, which have no bearing on the value of the business. So, for retirement, I need $10 million. My business only does $1 million a year, but I need 10 million, so my asking price is $10 million. And so there, it's not obviously reasonable. So at that point, that you need as a seller to make a decision as to, is this the right time for me to sell? Do I want to continue to grow it so that I can get closer to what I really need? Or do I accept the fact that that's not the reality and that's not the value, and I'm going to have to go for what is a market. So we see that quite a bit. Typically, as a seller, if you have numbers that are a lot higher than what the business is worth, then you may not be that motivated a seller, which is fine. Maybe the timing's not right for you. So I think that's one important aspect. The other thing is there's this thing called the tax man, and I just heard the other day they talk about the number of days. I forget what it's called now, but essentially the number of days you have to work before you paid off the tax man for the year, and depending on your tax bracket, but sometime in April probably. And you need to factor that into the deal because a lot of times sellers get caught off guard, not recognizing that, geez, I have a lot less than I thought I was going to have. And so it's important that you talk to your accountant, CPA, to understand the implications of the transaction and what you're going to be left with, because the time to find that out is not in a due diligence stage.
Yeah, I can imagine there's probably some horror stories over the years of people who have been dinged with taxes and not realizing it, and especially for something like retirement, being caught off guard in a way that really affects their life and on an ongoing basis too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So related to that is, which financial metrics should be focused on in order to increase the valuation to meet the owner's goals there? Josh, maybe you have some thoughts to lead us off with on this one.
Sure. I think there's again kind of multiple layers to this. If we think about what's the valuation method that's going to be applied to buying this MSP, there's probably 6 or 7 widely recognized versions, but they're all going to have something to do with either cash flow or net profit. So I think really understanding what drives your net profit, having a solid goal that you've been shooting for some period of time so we can see a track record of achieving that goal. I think that's the table stakes. Like, we have to do that. Now, if your net profit isn't landing, at the level that you wish it would, then we do have to kind of work our way up the P&L so we can tell a true and meaningful story to the buyer. So if you can tell me that you're delivering 47% gross profit from the sale of products and services, I'm excited about that. If you're getting chewed up by, sales expenses or G&A, we can start the conversation with the buyer and figure out how to make that narrative fit in a way that can still get you a strong valuation. But if your gross profit, so obviously my theme here is gross profit, if our overall gross profit is landing us in the high 30s or the low 30s, well, you're not going to hit any net profit that's going to be significant in a way that's going to be inspiring to a buyer, but you're also likely not to have profited much from that business at all. So we want to tell a story that we sell and deliver a gross profit that reflects that we're operationally sound. So that's my number one, is show me your gross profit. I'll tell you the story of your business. Then we're going to kind of get into the metric of that everyone seems to really love, which is recurring revenue. You start talking to buyers and you can add $100,000 a month of recurring revenue, you have their attention. You start talking 200, 300, there's buyers out there that are willing to pay very high valuations just to get that recurring revenue, and they're going to suggest that they can be more profitable with it. So the recurring revenue, the net profit, these are your table stakes. These are what everyone really focuses on. But as I'm preparing my business for sale, I'm going to make sure that my gross profit, overall gross profit margin is well above 42% to tell the story that we're operationally sound.
Thanks for that. And it makes me think too, in terms of the gross profit and reviewing the P&L, what sort of expense categories do you see people having the most opportunity to tighten up to increase that gross profit?
Yeah, so great question, Devin. Where companies tend to struggle the most in delivering a solid service department gross profit is in those service salaries, that service payroll. We really preach to our clients and anyone who listen that you got to stay at 33% service salaries to service revenue. If we can't get that, if we can't get real close to that, like 34, 35% at the max, then you're not sound in your practices just yet. You're doing great, and we're your biggest fan, but 33% tells us a lot of stories. It tells us how well we dispatch. It tells us how well we right size our staffing to our client needs. It tells us a story about how well we're pricing our agreements and our hourly rates to match what our payroll concerns are. So that's a huge one, Devin, is service salary, service revenue. That's a cog or an expense that can really be a bellwether to your success, but it can also be a big red flag when you're not achieving it.
And I totally agree, Josh. You're you're approaching it in a similar way. I think one of the things that we see on the smaller end of sellers is they don't have the level of detail in their financials to be able to break apart on a service level, and also even more granular at a client level where their profitability is. So overall, that they know here's my gross margin, here's my net profit, but somewhere they know they're making money somewhere in there, but they don't know where they're making it from. And so ideally, and this is not, I'll say majority of smaller MSPs will not have this, but to the extent that you can, ideally you would attach a cost of goods sold associated with each line item of revenue, essentially. So for hardware, you've got a cost of goods sold for hardware, and the cost of goods sold for hardware doesn't exceed the revenue that you're generating from the hardware, because we've seen that. And of course, that can happen from a timing mismatch perspective. It can happen if there was an error in categorization, which is also often the case. You got an invoice with a few line items in there, hardware being the largest one. So bookkeeper puts it all under hardware, where there's some other items in there as well. And then you also have accrual versus your
Cash basis.
Thank you, cash basis accounting. And so with cash, timing is going to be thrown off. So those are, ideally, if you can look at those items and try to tighten them up a little bit, then it'll show a better story, and you'll be able to defend it more easily.
All right, thanks for that. So let's discuss the next question here, which is, will having a sales team in place increase my valuation? So how would you approach this from the owner's perspective, and what are the downsides of not having a sales team in place in terms of the evaluation?
Yeah, it's similar to having phenomenal P&L hygiene and having good, revenue, COGS, gross profit, sales expenses, G&A, all really clearly told in the P&L. Those are things that give a buyer a lot more confidence, or at very least doesn't decay whatever confidence they have in you that existed already. Having a sales team in place shows a maturity, a planning, and a good understanding of your business. Sales teams are something that the traditional MSP we struggle with as an industry. We've struggled with it for 20 years, and no signs indicating that we won't continue to. So if you can bring to a buyer that you have even 2 salespeople or 3 or 5, but even 2 or 3 salespeople, you're sending a message of mastery in our observation, our experience. So what's a buyer's biggest fear? They're afraid that everything is dependent on you. They're afraid that you're out of balance with, the distribution of clients. And if they're afraid that everything's going to be on you and you don't have a sales team, then they automatically know that we're buying a book of business. We're not buying a business. So buying a book of business is one thing, and it can be profitable and it can be a great outcome. But buying a business, having to sell a buyer buying a business is kind of an ideal scenario for a lot of buyers. Now, the PE firms and the roll-up firms, do they care or not care? They probably care less. But if you're selling to another MSP, what they're buying is something they don't have, whether it's a phenomenal service delivery organization or a great book of business of recurring revenue. And in many times, the company that we observe is when people have a sales team, when companies have a sales team, the interest is a lot higher among more buyers, and you're going to get a higher valuation. Now, that's observationally, it's anecdotally, but you're not going to lose by having a sales team no matter what. Plus, you're likely to get a higher valuation. What's your experience, Hartland?
Yeah, Josh, I would agree. The only caveat I'd put in there is to say that the assumption is that the sales team is productive and paying their way. Because
Absolutely.
We have spoken to many groups before who said, geez, been there, done that, tried that, and lost, $100,000, $200,000 on a salesperson that went nowhere, right? They hired them, they had them in place for 3 months, 6 months, a year, and they didn't produce. So and therefore they were gone. And so sometimes we see these fluctuations that affect, of course, the financials, because I'm a small business. If you're paying out $150,000 for a salesperson, that is going to have a decent impact on EBITDA. So I think that the first caveat is the assumption is that you've got a person or team in place, and that those people are productive and can justify their existence from a cost perspective. And so if that's the case, then you've now got a system, right? And to your point, buyers are looking to buy a customer base, but they're also looking to buy a system, a process, and this is an engine that is going to continue to produce, along with the marketing and other things that are being done. So the end result of this is really what they're buying, which is the outcome. I mean, there's new business. The new business equals growth. Growth equals a nice annuity for the buyer. So I think the sales team in place is absolutely going to help, but the assumption is that they're effective, and that they would be ones that the buyer would want to continue to keep.
Yeah, agreed 100%. Yeah.
And I see a lot of times on the marketing side of the business too, where MSPs really do rely on word of mouth and referrals and the owner's personal networking in order to generate leads. So having a credible story that there's a sales team generating leads and converting those leads, it kind of goes to your point, Josh, where it kind of demonstrates that it's like a business unit, not just the owner that's being acquired and the owner's reputation. So
And
that makes
Devin,
sense.
let me add on to that too, Devin. And I say this with, peace and love, and I say it with encouragement to anyone watching. If you find yourself in that place when you are saying, we built this business on word of mouth and reputation, I want you to continue to be proud of that. But I want you to also have a pause in your thinking to suggest that perhaps what I'm bragging about is what everyone brags about. Everybody who has a business that's above 300,000, even 100,000, even 50,000, gets to say, "Oh, I'm a really nice guy and I do a good job," and people spread the word. That's table stakes, folks. That's not your badge. That's not the thing that you are going to go to market and say, "That's why you should buy me." That almost becomes not quite a detriment, but it certainly isn't what's going to get you the valuation. So I think.
Go ahead, Josh. Yeah.
Oh, please go ahead.
I was just saying, especially if it's tied to the owner and their reputation. If the owner is not going to stick around, so agreed.
Interesting. So, another question to ask for MSP selling is, are there any clients who are month to month or break fix that can be converted to longer contracts? And, there's different perspectives on this. And so Josh, you maybe want to start us off with your perspective on this question?
Yeah, settle in, boys. It's going to be a minute. This is a near and dear topic to my heart. In fact, as we speak, we're watching a transaction where a really big company that has an MSP underneath it is buying a pure play IT solution provider. So they are very into the recurring revenue at this larger organization, to the point where when you look at their ratio of service revenue between project, hourly, and recurring, they're like north of 95% recurring. Now, that sounds sexy. That sounds cool. Like, man, I want that. I want a lot of everything recurring. Forget hourly and project. Well, that's fine until we get into looking at the gross profitability on those agreements. So if you're going to tell me that you're just die hard, I only want recurring revenue, then without missing a beat in the same breath, you better tell me your agreement gross profitability. Because if you're just chasing recurring revenue and not measuring your profitability on it, I'm not always that interested in your story. And you know who's going to be interested is in due diligence. They're going to dig through that and they're going to find that you've got a lot of really lame agreements out there that you don't know how to make money on. So we are really big fans of give me a nice mix of recurring, project, and hourly, so that when you do have 60% of it is recurring, 20% is project, 20% is hourly, that question of, well, I'm the buyer, can I convert that, that 20 that hourly revenue into recurring, that question holds less weight because you have a really healthy mix. I've got 100K a month of recurring, I've got 40 or 30K of project, I got 20, 30, 40K of hourly. That's a healthy mix, and you're not going to have to put your buyer into the position of saying, how many of these will convert? In fact, you'll show them through your P&L, through your agreement gross profit, that we capture moves, adds, and changes through our hourly. We have a program that lets us meet people where they are in their buying of IT services, where, yeah, they're hourly for the first few months, then we get them into doing some projects with the goal of getting them into recurring. That story is interesting if you can tell it and prove it. It's not as interesting when it's everything's hourly and we just kind of scramble month to month. Now, in this scenario, the seller is about 70% hourly. Like, they've got a lot of hourly, but I'll tell you what, his P&L smokes his net profit smokes that of the buyer. And so this moment is allowing that buyer to say, maybe we've been thinking about hourly incorrectly or break fix incorrectly. It does have a home on the P&L. It does lead to stronger relationships if done right. And it's going to be a good proof to your buyer that you know how to manage a client engagement without just bearing your AGP. It's not a very popular opinion, but boy, we see it time and time again.
Josh, that's you're right. It's definitely a different perspective. I think the discussions that I've had and the kind of crux of this is: are you looking to build a business to sell, or are you looking to have the business to keep? And if my view is that they're not necessarily the same. How many times have I heard someone say, "Oh, well, our clients have been with us for 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. They're not going anywhere. They're great. I can show you the history. We don't have any reason to put these clients in contracts." I mean, it's probably not a week that goes by that I don't hear this. And someone says, "Well, I'm not going to take anybody to court anyway. I don't feel that that's a fair way. If you want to do business with us, you do business with us. If you don't, you don't, and you want to leave, then that's your prerogative. I don't want to force somebody's hand to stick with us." And all of those things make perfect sense. And from if you were to look at this over a longer period of time, I think you'll find that that you're, as you're indicating, Josh, it may well be that someone is more profitable in some of these other models. The problem goes when you're looking to a buyer who's looking for certainty, and they're not getting the certainty. So what are you looking to do? If you're just looking to run it for a while, then perhaps you're fine as is. But if you're looking to sell it, you need to understand that buyers are looking for certainty. They're looking for a revenue stream. They're looking for a customer base that's going to be with them long term. And if there's any holes in that bucket, i.e. they can cancel with 30 days notice, or it's month to month, or blocks of hours, or whatever, that aren't certain, you're going to end up the one that's going to take the risk. And so you're going to end up in a structure that's got an earn-out component to it. In other words, if the revenue is realized, you'll get paid. If the revenue isn't realized because the customer leaves, you won't get paid. And when there's a sale that goes on, there's going to be some rocking of the boat, hopefully less than more. But that rocking of the boat may cause those customers to leave. And of course, if they're in a contract, then they're less likely to leave and kind of get through maybe that initial rockier period where, oh geez, I'm not dealing with my favorite tech that I always call, but I'm dealing with somebody new now. They might not like that at first, but they'll get through it. And if the contract will keep them a bit stickier. But, there are certainly lots of MSPs that I've heard of over the years that have basically said to the clients, look, we're moving to this model. This is what we're doing. And if you're on board, great. And here's what it would look like. And if you're not, then, I totally understand. But, we're just not the vendor for you anymore. And we'll help you offload and find somebody else type of thing. And sometimes that's enough to force the client's hand. And sometimes, they'll go their own way.
And to your point, you're 100% accurate. When it comes time to start the journey of selling, I can think of a really good client and longtime client and friend out in the Northeast, New England area, that he was on a 5-year plan to sell. And, he is, kind of superhuman in his ability to plan and anticipate what's going to be coming next for him. So he went on a 5-year journey where he was like you described, which is, yeah, we asked for a year, but we're not going to sue you if you leave us. Where he just took that 5 years, kept on selling new businesses, but got, if not all of his existing client base, his portfolio, onto 3-year contracts. And that just, when he found his buyer, they were beyond thrilled. They couldn't be happier that he had these really beautiful contracts that were very long term, and he got one of the highest multiples I've ever seen. So in positioning for selling, yeah, I mean, the recurring revenue is going to be, obviously the sexiest thing to the buyer. But start that process. If you come to the table saying, I'm pretty sure that a lot of these hourly folks would convert, you're putting yourself in a pretty tough spot.
Yeah, I love that. Pretty sure. I think it'll happen. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Probably.
How much of that certainty?
Yeah.
Great. So, another big factor that sellers should consider is the company culture and employee morale. And from, a buyer's perspective, making sure that there's a cultural fit is of the utmost importance. And that's all going to flow into whether or not the employees stick around. What are some other thoughts here and some considerations around the company culture and employee morale and getting that in order before an acquisition?
Yeah, this one, I mean, it's 2023. If you're a shitty place to work or you're an asshole, and feel free if anyone wants to put a money jar out, just text me and I'll pay you $1 if you're listening to this and are offended. But if you're a shitty place to work, no one's fooled, no one's tricked, no one misreads that. No one is thinking, well, maybe it's really a great place and that's just one guy. No, you have got to provide an awesome place for people to be, and you have to quantify that. I think in the selling process, it's not good enough for them to interview a couple of employees and, oh yeah, this is a great place to work, or certainly not good enough for you to just tell it. We're huge fans of Net Promoter Score to figure out, the loyalty and how your clients view you. But there's also ENPS, Employee Net Promoter Score. And if you haven't done it today, you're already late. Start today. Start listening to your team. Do a 360 review. What do your people actually think of you? Anonymize it as much as possible. really be proud of the fact that you're a great place to work. And it doesn't mean putting in nap rooms and overpaying everyone. It just means, do you have a vision for what it's like to work at your company? There's just so many red flags that we hear as consultants that say, ah, this is not going to be a fun place to work. First one we hear is, we say, oh, Bob. Okay, yeah, that's Bob. What's his job title? We don't do job titles around here. Those are stupid. Well, owner, they're stupid to you, but they're not stupid to Bob. Bob is defining himself by the work that he does and how he's acknowledged professionally. And if that is a statement you'll make to an outsider, that's a really, really big indication that you're not paying close enough attention to the morale and the culture of the company. So I think Harlan could probably tell us better about how that impacts valuations. But I'll tell you what, if you're not a fun place to work and it gets time to sell, what's that buyer's biggest fear? That everyone's going to ditch. They're going to leave. This is just the perfect moment and reason for them to leave. I'd love to hear Heartland's thoughts on this even more.
Yeah, I think there's two things that I'll say. One, that if the current culture is one that is not going to readily fit into a buyer's culture, right? So there needs to be a fit there. Then that buyer may not be interested. And if there are enough buyers that aren't interested for that reason, and of course other reasons, you end up with a supply and demand situation. So if nobody wants your business, or very few want your business, the value that you're going to get is lower than if there's a high demand for it, obviously. And so company culture will be important, to the extent that you can't obviously predict who the buyer is, and to create a culture that's going to fit with a buyer when you don't even know who the buyer is. But if you've got a culture, rather than doing nothing, that culture will be a fit for somebody, and there'll be obviously the culture has been created deliberately, and so that's kind of what they're looking for, as opposed to not really putting much focus on it. And then Josh, as you said, the other important thing is that the culture will impact the team, and then the team is going to be affected in a way that will ultimately trickle down to the customers. So the customers will be happy when they're being serviced by a happy team, and vice versa. So again, from a valuation perspective, there's sort of two elements of it. The customers will be stickier and less likely to churn. And of course, if they're in contracts, well, you've got a little bit of insurance. But if it comes up for renewal, then obviously you want them to renew. And if they're not, and there's an earnout in place because of, let's say, month to month, again, you really need to make sure that those employees are servicing those customers properly, so they don't use an excuse to leave. So it sort of translates into, from a valuation perspective, and that you as a seller won't get the earnout because the customers are going to leave because the culture is poor.
One thing that comes to mind here too is, over the pandemic, more and more companies, including MSPs, moved to remote work. And that has had an effect on employee morale too, where especially if you're living in a major metro region, which has, say, traffic problems, and the degree to which you could decrease the commute for your employees is going to make them more sticky, not only for you, but for an acquiring company as well. And also probably if you have remote processes in place and you can service your clients remotely, that would be attractive to buyers from more regions. So just kind of connecting a couple of things there that might be biased here because I like remote work myself, but I think that is a good way to increase the employee morale there too.
Yeah, agreed.
Devin, would you agree, Devin, that the remote work, it's with so many people working remotely, that you kind of have to have an even greater intentionality to the culture, with like, oh, you don't get to see those folks that you really love every day. You don't get to sit around the break room like you did before. Would you agree with that you kind of have to reset that company culture to make sure you have some intention behind it?
I think so. And there are things like online team building exercises, but I don't think those carry as much weight as in-person team building, or even just going out for dinners or lunches together. So, if as long as the team isn't too distributed, if there is an opportunity to come together for events like that, I think that goes a long way to building that culture. And also, there's a whole element of like company culture in terms of digital tools. So, for instance, different companies have different culture in Slack. And kind of building that up and having specific guidelines for how to communicate in your digital tools can contribute to that as well. It's not just an in-person culture, but a digital culture too. And especially if you're a company that started off as more having an office and having everybody in the office, and then has transitioned to more of a remote or a hybrid model. Especially for a hybrid model, you need to be careful that you're including the employees who are more remote, and not excluding them from the company culture that people are experiencing in person. And it's obviously easier said than done, but it's just it should be a major consideration these days.
Yeah, right on, Devin.
So another question for sellers to consider here before selling their business is, how attractive is the current technology stack and the infrastructure? And Josh, I know Barry McKinley, you guys do a lot of consulting when it comes to ConnectWise and other tools for MSP. So I was curious about your thoughts on this question in particular.
Yeah, this one's really interesting, and it is something that today my day started with. I thought it was going to be 45 minutes, turned out to about 3.5 hours of getting that same buyer and seller. And, they're both working in the ConnectWise stack. They're both, similarly, aligned there. But the seller's ConnectWise stack is so much more robust because they're that pure play MSP getting acquired by a company that the MSP is a secondary business. So, but they are a fifth of the size of the buyer. So we're really having to kind of game theory out, to whom are we going to merge? We're going to take yours and put it into theirs, or theirs and put them into yours. Are we going to get a third, brand new instance of ConnectWise and rebuild it beautifully from the top? I think the key takeaway as I sat and participated in those meetings today was, I'm really glad you're both using ConnectWise. And I don't care if you're both using Autotask, Tigerpod, whatever you're using, but that CR or that PSA is like. And, there's that old saying, like, you never got fired. No one ever got fired by buying IBM products.
Yeah.
Are there cooler, more interesting things? Sure, there are. But I think you really have to have an awareness of, are you going to drive a Ford F-150 around the world, or are you going to, drive, a Range Rover? Well, let's go with the F-150 because everyone can work on the F-150. Not everyone can work on that Range Rover. So what's the predominant stack of your period or your generation? And staying within the bounds of that is probably a really good idea, because the buying the business and negotiation and due diligence, that's all really tough stuff. That's the easy part. The tough part is getting those teams merged together, that integration of the two teams and all the technology. So if we can remove one of the roadblocks or reduce one of the roadblocks by saying the core RMM, the core PSA, the core quoting tool, the core documentation, I think having similarness is always great. But no matter what you do, having that thing built out in a way that's really serving you, so that if you do decide that, hey, we're going to keep these separate for a period of time, that you're not having to continue battling against a bad tool setup from the jump. So and then you can get into all the fun stuff. What, supplementary, what are the other tools you use to run the business of the technology? If you're doing fun stuff, if you're doing unique stuff with reporting engines or doing cool things with monitoring engines or whatever it may be, I think the better built out your stack, the more attractive you're going to be to buyers, both on the front end and on that integration piece with the two teams coming together.
Well said. Hartland, anything to add onto that question or that topic?
I think with Josh being more of an expert in this one than myself, and in interest of time, I'll not say a whole lot. But there obviously are a lot of different tools, and I haven't seen it. Rarely has it sort of resulted in a buyer kind of not being interested in an opportunity, but they definitely start thinking about all the work and time it's going to take to switch over. And it's unlikely you're going to line up all the tools, the entire stack. Usually they start to align on RMM and PSA, and then everything else is sort of can be worked out. But to the extent that there's alignment there, as Josh said, you certainly don't want to be running two different systems. Although people do two different systems sometimes, on their own if they're switching over. So there's a bit of a period of crossover, so it can be done. The only other aspect is that we've had systems before, or situations rather before, where a buyer was in one environment, switched to another environment, and then the seller is on the technology that they used to be on, and so they're familiar with it, but they now need to move everybody over to their environment, or instances where the customers had an experience, and then they moved away from that experience, and then the buyer wants to move them back to that experience again, and the team, and so it creates some interesting dynamics around how to manage that. But these are all sort of circumstance-based decisions.
Thanks for that. And let's see. So we have a couple more questions left here, and we are getting to the top of our of the hour here. So or half past rather. So another question here is to do with customer concentration and what percentage revenue is associated with the top 5 clients. And how would this be viewed, like a high concentration of customers from a buyer's perspective, I guess, is really the consideration here. What are your thoughts on this one, Josh?
Yeah, anytime you get, a single client over 20% of your revenue, it's pretty scary. When you start getting into, top 5 clients, even representing, 30, 40% of the revenue, or arguably, depending on your size, above 30% across the top 5 clients, that's scary. It's scary for a buyer. It should be scary for you in running that business. It's really kind of a matter of like, God, I'm here. What can I do about it? Right. So this gets back to, you ask an owner day to day, what are your goals? What are you trying to do here? They're going to give some version of the answer of, I don't know, maybe my kids will take it over, or I'll give it to the employees, or maybe we'll sell it one day. That's an answer I expect from a really young owner, or a really small owner who just trying to make a great living. Those are okay answers. But if you've owned your business for more than a couple of years, and this is really, you're employing people, you're feeding other families other than your own, you have to be responsible enough to not find yourself in that spot. And you have to be able to have a real clear vision that we will sell this business at this stage. When these metrics are built, we will be in a position that we will have the option to sell, and that's a likely outcome, so that it shifts and shapes your behavior day to day to not find yourself in that spot. You come to the table with 40% of your revenue across the top 5 clients, and I'm doing due diligence on you, or I'm representing a buyer, I'm gonna have a field day on you, because this is easy work. This is easy to really kind of bust apart and make you feel very unconfident, or whatever the right word would be, about your own business. So don't give the buyer the opportunity to just take an easy pot shot at this. I'd love to hear if there's a different take on this, or Harlan, what's your thought on that?
Well, I mean, I was talking with a client last week, and we were on this same topic, and they said, interestingly enough, that they had this large client, and that client kept growing, and their requirements kept growing, and so they were saying, well, what do we do? We're not going to say no to them. Sorry, you're getting too large to be a client, so we're just not going to add any more revenue, because we don't want you to be a larger percentage of our business than you already are. No one's ever going to say that. And so yet they were growing, of course, at the same time, but they said that the client was growing faster than they were growing. So the client was continually representing this significant and increasingly more significant percentage of their revenue. but yet there wasn't really much they could do about it. I think if you were being acquired, then of course those clients are now going to be thrown into the mix with all of the rest of the business. And so any one of those clients, even if they're representing a larger part of your business, it won't represent nearly as much of the total larger pie when it gets thrown into the buyer's mix. But the reality is, I mean, it is what it is not much you can do to sort of stop it, in my view, other than just stop servicing that customer, which doesn't make sense. But you should expect that if this is happening, that you're going to end up with some kind of an earn-out type of structure or retention strategy or ratchet back if these clients leave. Now, if they're in contracts, of course, that helps. But if there's customer concentration, the buyer's just going to say, look, we want to make sure these customers sticks around. And so there might be a specific carve out on if there are one or two, three customers, they might identify those separately. Here's how much we're going to buy your business for. And then, if these ones stick around, then, this is what the payment's going to look like for these particular customers, separate from the rest.
Yeah, well said there, Hartland. Thank you for that. And so I think because we only have a minute left, maybe we'll skip the last question today.
What's the last question, Devin? I want to see it.
How much would it cost to replace the owner's role in the business? And, maybe I'll just say quickly that this goes back to, Josh, your comments about the gross profit and the reviewing the P&L, because from a buyer's perspective, the cost of replacing the owner is an adjustment that gets made to the P&L when we're calculating the adjusted EBITDA. And so, to the degree to which the owner is involved in the business and in multiple roles, and the more difficult it is to replace those roles, ultimately does have an effect on the valuation. So that is a consideration as well, and it's dependent on the owner's role and also their geography and how difficult it is to replace them.
Better breakdown than I could have given, Devin. Wonderful.
Thanks, Josh. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks, Josh, so much for joining us as well. It was great to pick your brain for some 45 minutes here today, and thought you had some really great insights. So we'd love to have you back on another webinar in the future. And if you have any questions for us, you can reach out for the host broker at info@thehostbroker.com. And Josh, how can they get in touch with you for Barry McKinley?
Yeah, definitely. Hit us up at barrymckinley.com, Josh at Barry McKinley. On our social media, on Facebook and Instagram, pretty easy to find. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us your stories. Tell me where I'm full of it too. I love hearing feedback on, Josh, you said this thing. I can't believe how wrong you were. I love it. So please just hit us up, and those are the means to get with us. Look forward to hearing from anyone.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks so much again, Josh, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation today. And be sure to subscribe to the Host Broker for future updates and for future webinars. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.